Chapter 1157, Poise. Klein pressed down on the grayish-white wall and slowly sat up straight. He smiled and shook his head. Before I fill my stomach, my brain refuses to work. He was speaking the truth and also a lie. This was because, before becoming a complete mythical creature, a saint would still be hungry and thirsty. But to a Sequence 3 demigod, not eating or drinking for half a month wasn't a problem. As for a whole mythical creature, eating was only a hobby, not a necessity. What he wanted to express was that, before he officially made attempts at escaping, he needed to be in optimal condition. "The habit of a magician," Ammon commented with a smile. "I'm not in charge of providing food, but you can think of a solution yourself." Looking at the lantern on the ground, Klein thought for a few seconds before reaching out his right hand into the air. A not-so-tall coffee table immediately appeared in front of him. It was an item from the residence belonging to Dwayne Dantes. Under the dim yellow light, Klein reached out once again to summon a beautifully packaged box from the historical void. Inside the box was a set of cutlery, including a knife, fork, and cup. The reason why he chose this item was because he couldn't form a set of cutlery by individually summoning them. He could only maintain 3 images from the historical void at the same time. After setting up the cutlery in a leisure manner, Klein politely turned his head to the side and nodded at the pointed hat-wearing Ammon. Following that, he summoned a medium-well-done steak covered in black pepper sauce. It landed on the porcelain plate, emitting some steam. With him slicing the steak with the knife, he revealed the remaining edge of the pink protein. Klein forked a piece of beef and stuffed it into his mouth. He felt that the texture was real and the texture was succulent. It wasn't fake at all, as it really calmed the anxiety of his stomach. For 15 minutes, not only will I not feel hungry, but I will also receive real provisions. After swallowing the piece of beef, Klein smiled and introduced it to Ammon like a hospitable host, and not a pitiful beyonder who had been kidnapped. Ammon pressed against the crystal monocle and nodded with a smile. "I've tried it, it's not bad. Your ability to adapt is really quick. Are you really not considering being my blessed?" After cutting another chunk of beef, Klein forked it up and replied as though he was chatting with a friend. "Kill me." At that moment, the relative frequent lightning and endless darkness ruled the land. Wherever the light from the surroundings couldn't shine on, eyes were staring at the area with zero emotion. The twisted, dark-red grass gently swayed in the occasional breeze. In the half-collapsed building, the dim yellow light painted the artistic coffee table and the exquisite cutlery with warm colors. The aroma of the steak wafted in the air, not showing any contrast with the outside world that was continuously connected to it. Under the gaze of the terrifying monsters in the depths of the darkness, Klein enjoyed a sumptuous meal in a refined and poised manner in the desolate land that was soaked in extreme terror. After finishing his steak, he summoned a small glass of iced wine from Mager Manor and drank it in one gulp. Following that, cream soup, pan-fried cod, tender lamb stew with peas, baked potato skins, and all sorts of grape wines were summoned one after another before entering Klein's stomach. During this process, the steak that was the first to be eaten had already been maintained for a long period of time. It had vanished into thin air, but Klein's stomach and body were numbed by the subsequent food, and he was oblivious to it. Of course, the coffee table and food were replenished. Otherwise, they wouldn't have lasted to the end of his meal. At the end of the meal, Klein continued reaching out his hand, pulling out a cup from the void. Inside was a ball of vanilla ice cream. He then used the spoon to scoop the ice cream into his mouth, feeling it melt with its delicious sweetness. After the ball was finished, he still wasn't satisfied as he summoned another ball of ice cream from the historical void. As such, he ate 5 different flavors of ice cream in a consecutive fashion. When Klein reached out his hand for the 6th time, Ammon, who was sitting on his side, suddenly laughed. "Your fate has had an abnormal change. You're lucky enough. Is this your preparation?" Klein's right hand immediately froze in midair. His pupils seemed to dilate to a certain extent. Almost at the same time, in the darkness around them, where the lanterns couldn't shine, strange creatures twitched and instantly became Klein's marionette. This time, Klein sent out 100 worms of spirit in one go, hoping that one of them would be lucky enough to avoid Ammon's theft. Right on the heels of that, behind the coffee table, a figure wearing a black coat and no hat was replaced with a disgusting vampire covered in pus. The artistic coffee table and exquisite cutlery shattered like glass that had been smashed to the ground. Countless cracks appeared and shattered. They quickly returned to the historical void, just in case it affected Klein's subsequent summoning attempts. In the next second, the 100 marionettes, along with the Klein, who had hidden somewhere, reached out to grab at the void. He attempted to avoid Ammon's interference with quantity. At that moment, they were all scholars of yore. This was the ability of bizarre sorcerers, the source of the qualitative change of a seer. Of course, the chances of success of each marionette summoning was independent, so there was no influence each had with the other. At that moment, the projection that Klein was summoning was the projection of Rionette Tynker, who had recovered to her peak state in the Tudor ruins. Due to the contract and charms, she was the easiest angel projection he could summon from the historical void. Ammon was still sitting leisurely in his spot. His monocle emitted a faint glow as he watched the 101 Kleins summon at the same time. With his right hands reaching out in an orderly manner before being retracted, none of his 100 marionettes succeeded. He didn't drag Rionette Tynker out of the void. At that moment, Ammon raised his right hand and also grabbed ahead of him. His arm sank slightly, and he casually pulled it back. Outside the half-collapsed building, a huge cloth doll that was as huge as a castle appeared. It was wearing a dark and complicated long dress, bound by vines. Ancient Bane Rionette Tynker. Ammon had stolen the historical image that was summoned by Klein. Rionette Tynker's red eyes immediately reflected the figures of Klein's 100 marionettes. Without a sound, the marionettes that were either disguised with Klein's appearance or in the state of a monster emitted a faint glow, turning into homed mountain goats, white rabbits, and other different animals. Transformation curse. Klein's actual body had long disappeared. Then, he walked out of the flames that rose up from the animal hide lantern. He looked at the various animals that might be considered his and suddenly sat down and chuckled. Taking a stroll after a meal effectively improves one's health. He didn't mention anything about his attempt to escape, as if nothing had happened. Ammon maintained his relaxed posture and nodded cooperatively. I've read quite a number of books written by humans. There are indeed such opinions among them. With that said, he raised his hand and pointed at the projection of Rionette Tynker. This is your messenger. This was something that could be easily confirmed, so Klein didn't hide it. He tersely acknowledged and nodded. What a pity. Ammon sized up Rionette Tynker's projection and shook his head with a tusk. As he felt the food in his stomach disappear, Klein asked, "What's the matter?" "I should bring you to Backland to wait for a few more days. That way, I can wait for your messenger to deliver a letter to you. Then, she will become my messenger." Ammon nudged his monocle on his right eye and said with a smile, snatching an angel messenger. "That will be very challenging and fun, isn't it? Life needs some fun, excitement, and anticipation." "I share the same thoughts," Klein replied sincerely. "What a pity." The hatted Ammon shook his head again. "Evemite is someone I need to be careful about. If we stayed there any longer, even I wouldn't have any idea what would happen." As he spoke, this angel of time dispelled the historical void projection of Rionette Tynker, allowing her to vanish in front of Klein. "You seem to be very wary of the goddess." Klein pretended to be a devout believer of the Evernight goddess. Of course, he didn't need to don a disguise. He was still a blessed of Evernight. Ammon's gaze shifted to the lantern inside the half-collapsed building and looked at the dim yellow light. "I'm unable to steal things that I'm curious about from a concealed state. I can't decipher what other arrangements she might have and what the key thing to take note of are." To a king of angels of the Marauder pathway, there was sufficient reason to be apprehensive. Taking advantage of the opportunity while Ammon was answering his question, Klein suddenly recited the honorific name of the Evernight goddess in Jotun. "You are the Evemite goddess, who stands higher than the cosmos and more eternal than eternity." Just as he said that, his thoughts were lost. If he hadn't had such plans previously, he wouldn't have known that he had made such an attempt. Ammon turned to look at him and said with a smile, "Are you trying to sound me out, believing that I'll also repeat your words after stealing your thoughts and words?" At Sequence 4 Parasite, one is able to control the stolen items and make them appear at a suitable time. "Is that so?" Klein nodded gently. "Thank you." As he spoke, Klein quickly summarized his experience and lessons of his escape attempt. Because the existence of the contract and their subordinative relationship, summoning Miss Messenger is the easiest amongst all the angels I know. Summoning the ice cream from the past can establish a subtle connection with he, who represents fate, and allow me to be blessed with luck. Yes, every ball of ice cream represents a portion of my luck. I originally planned on summoning ice cream as a cover to secretly summon the snake of fate. In the future, the summoning had to be done with a certain degree of interference. Otherwise, Ammon would be able to directly steal the historical void image I summon. It would only be giving him a helper after going through so much effort. Just as his thoughts raced, Ammon pointed at the bunch of animals that had been cursed by the transformation curse, and he said with a slightly evil smile, "Aren't you worried that there won't be any suitable food in the forsaken land of the gods? There it is, as long as we don't dispel the curse, they're real animals." Klein was stunned as he suddenly looked at the goats and the white rabbits. With him willing them, the animals looked at him simultaneously. In a sense, they were all himself. After all, they were combinations of worms of spirit and monsters before being hit by the curse.